Greetings from a Vermont late winter, or maybe a Vermont spring day. It's hard to tell. The relationship to spring around here, I mean, mud season's a better description, but the relationship around here is like today warm, sunny, spring is coming. This evening, winter weather advisory. Oh, I'm here. Come on. You know, then I'm gonna smash your hopes. Anyway, it's a very dysfunctional relationship, but unfortunately, there's no a choice other than to stay in it. Anyway, I'm recently back from spending a couple of weeks out in the Anza Borrego Desert, where you know 95 degrees, and now back here, and I feel like I have a lot to catch up on. I have a lot of things I that came up and that I've either written about or want to make a audio or video post about. But for today, I want to kind of address the subject of we could call it holding space, or we could call it some thoughts on the container. So this was partly inspired by a conversation I had last night with a couple of friends who host a biweekly dance group where people come, and the intention or the container is to, yeah, feel free to express whatever your body or your energy body wants to express in a safe container. And but it's also inspired by the 35 plus years leading Vision Quest, where I also speak about the container, and it's also inspired by I've led not that many, but I've also been leading men's groups in the Mythic Warrior now for 32 years, and often we there are certain processes within the Mythic Warrior where we speak about the container. So maybe um, starting in a vision quest, when I talk about the container, I basically tell people that in terms of a vision quest, I say, think about a container like a pot on the stove. Okay, that's a container. It could be a 3-quart pot, a gallon and a half pot, but imagine a pot on the stove. And I say, so the container, just like a pot on the stove, has a certain structure. The pot on the stove, it could be a stainless steel, it could be cast iron, it could be many other things. But when I say, in terms of the vision quest, I say, so it has a certain structure. The whole overall process is 11 days, 4 days of preparation and teaching, a 4 day and night solo fasting in the wilderness, and 3 days to go into integrating what all that means. And then I say the container of the quest, the solo, generally it includes essentially 3 day, these elements. It's a certain amount of time long. It's 4 days and nights. It's being alone without without entertainment, distraction, without the ability to listen to podcasts or social media. So it's alone, solitude, disconnected from all of the usual downloads that we get in at in this time of human history incessantly, that always are taking our attention back into the um, already consensually constructed world. So it's 4 days and nights. It involves fasting, not eating food, and it involves this kind of isolation from externals, isolation from stimuli that don't come out of your natural experience to the land, and it happens in wilderness. So that's when I explain that, I say that is the container. you know, the container has a certain form, and it's fasting, wilderness, and solitude. But then what I say is, but what what gets cooked or what gets brewed in that container depends on the ingredients you put into it. And on a vision quest, those ingredients are: what's your intention? What are you here to say goodbye to no long that you hope or are ready to no longer have be a part of your life? Are you here to say goodbye to living to please other people? Are you here to say goodbye to living as a victim? Are you, and both of those are internal states, or are you here to say goodbye to a time of your life, goodbye to a marriage, goodbye to childhood, etc. So what are your intentions? Are you here to say goodbye to something? Are you here to, in some sense, welcome in to something, um, to live for 4 days and nights in an incredibly authentic way? Are you here to welcome in a deeper connection to your purpose? Are you here to welcome into to claim some some passion or authentic way of being that you've never had to claim in me before? So yeah, what are your intentions? To say goodbye to something, to welcome something in, to live free of certain conditions. Also, what's your top priority? What do you want to, you know, 10 or 11 days from now? What do you most want to be driving away from here with? Um, who are your allies? What are your sources of strength, of guidance? Is it a connection to some higher power, a certain religion? Is it kind of a meditation practice? How do you most authentically connect? And are you going to bring that in with you, or are you looking for some change in that? So what I would say, so it expresses itself that way on a vision quest. And it's mostly about intention. And then, of course, the other teachings have, literally 30, 40 rituals and processes you could do within the vision quest if you chose to do them. So, so yes, I was. So in that instance, the container is really the vision quest, this uh, big, almost like primary cross cultural ritual whose purpose has been for years to find your passion, your purpose, to find out, answer the question, what am I here for? Or it's the primary purpose is to say goodbye, to make a transition from one stage of life, one way of being into another. So, so certainly that is a function of a can speak about the container that way. Now, obviously, that's not the kind of container that someone leading some kind of a conscious dance group have. And there, it's maybe the container. Again, it has a certain structure. It's this amount of time long. I think it's total 2 hours and an hour and a half of music and a certain kind of and there's a certain kind of I could call it trajectory of the music, starting relaxed and slow, and then getting very energetic in the middle point, and then kind of coming back into a more deep meditative space. There's a trajectory to the music, which is uh, hopefully will induce a sense of a journeying out of where you are now, where you are when you walk into the room, and take you into another space. Because as we know, music is certainly one of those things which automatically bypasses the conscious mind and speaks to various parts of ourselves outside of that. But one thing that's true of all containers is, and it doesn't matter whether I use the example of a pot on the stove or a basket, although the image of a basket really doesn't hold water, so to speak. But just kidding. But, essentially, a container holds something in and it keeps something out. You know, obviously, the pot on the stove, you want it to contain something. Otherwise, whatever you might put in there is just blah, this kind of burning mess on the stove or a basket. And so always when speaking about the container, you must be at least aware of something. Ooh, what do we want to happen within it? What do we want to bring in it? What do we want to put in it? And also, what is it that's hopefully being kept out? So every container has boundaries, borders. Um, and let me just briefly speak a little bit about perhaps a container in a different context. As most of you know, I've led this men's program, the Mythic Warrior, for 30 plus years, and within that there are very intense processes. So I'll just give an example of one. It is a truth mandala where essentially the participants in a room, a big circle is created. You know, we can make it out of rope or various other things, and then the circle is divided into four quadrants, and each of those quadrants is marked for. There's the quadrant of fear for four primary emotions. There's a quadrant of fear. There's the quadrant of anger. There's the quadrant of grief, and there's the quadrant of emptiness. And so, as we describe the makeup of the container, we say, okay, this process is going to last this long. Sometimes we choose a particular amount of time, an hour and a half, 2 hours, or sometimes we just say until it's done. It's and you can tell there's at some point it gets into a lot of energy, and then that energy peters out. And then we talk about the rules of the container. Oh, so when people step in, they can step into the quadrant of anger, the quadrant of grief, quadrant of fear. But the rules are when you step in to express the grief in your life. And we make it very clear one steps in to express the grief, not to talk about the grief. You know, when you step in the grief quadrant, you're not talking about the grief and what you're sad about and why you're sad about it or what happened to you to make you feel grief. You step into the grief. So it isn't talking when one steps into um, the quadrant of grief. The What happens is more, ah! It's not yak yak yak. And we make that specific. And other than that, there's very few rules. There's no rules that you have to uh, step in all the quadrants, or there's no rule that you have to go uh, in any order. So sometimes a person could just step into the quadrant of grief and let the grief come out, and then step out. But sometimes a person may step into the quadrant of anger, and all of this anger comes up, and then in the middle of that anger, the grief comes up, and then they right into the grief, and perhaps the grief is about the destruction of the world and the ecosystem, and they go 10 seconds, they're right back in the quadrant of anger, and it can go anger to grief. So we have, when holding a container, we have to essentially say, you know, how the container is constructed, what happens in it, and what's appropriate in it and what's not, and and then essentially let people know, what those rules are, so that when people step in, they know really um, um, what's expected and what's appropriate. And then the other, purpose of a container is, in that instance, what we're looking for is the expression of really strong, intense emotions that are normally labeled negative. And and so in that context, at some point when it's done, we end. We have to come in and close the container. We step in, and there is a whole process for closing it. And the reason for closing it is we want the expression of all of that, those usually parts of ourselves we don't like to speak about. So they're put out and shared with the community. But then we close it because we don't want that to, we don't want it at the dinner table. We don't want it, when we're doing something else. So we create a safe container so we can express all of this very intense stuff in in this container and then leave it there. It's like in that initial analogy when I spoke about the pot on the stove. It has a form, but the reason for a container on the stove is so you can turn up the heat. You know, you need a container if you're going to turn up the heat. Otherwise, you've got this kind of bubbling mass and mess kind of all over your kitchen. So anyway, I just wanted to introduce that idea of the container and the importance of knowing what the structure of it is, and what happens, what is put in it, in what's the intention to put in it, and and of course when you define a container, you also are defining what's not or shouldn't be in it. And so in some sense, doing that work, and letting people know what a container is, allows very intense things to happen and be contained so that they can be expressed. They don't have to be hidden or suppressed. But then, they don't contaminate the rest of the world. They're held in there. So there's an avenue, and they can be, we can have expressions that feel very unsafe or scary, but they're held in that way. We can deal with them safely. So I could say a lot more, but right now I won't. Um, I just want to say it's good to be back. Good to be back in Vermont, and it's good to be back posting. I wanted to post a lot when I was in the Anza-Borrego Desert, but no cell phone, most places, no internet. Um, and it was almost impossible to even deal with. I had a lap computer because, uh, you know, in that brightest, I would sometimes turn it on, and it was so bright I couldn't see the screen, I couldn't see the cursor, couldn't see anything. I felt helpless. It was awesome. Anyway, hope you're having a good day, and yeah, I hope to be doing part one, part two, and several other posts soon. All right. Many blessings. Aho.